In this video, we're going to continue our study of Aristotle's Ethics and read through chapter 4 of book 1 together. In the first 3 chapters, Aristotle has introduced us to the study of ethics by drawing our attention to the observation that all human actions and choices, arts and sciences, have some end at which they aim, and the ends of these arts are not all equal, but some are pursued for the sake of others, and therefore there's a hierarchy of ends among all these human actions. And that leads us to the question, what is the greatest of all of the ends, or the chief end of the human life? In chapter 3, we looked not only at what that chief end might be, but we talked about the nature of that art and said that it cannot be studied with an expectation of accuracy or exactness that we might seek in modern arithmetic or in classical geometry, but is pursued through a sort of rude adumbration. Aristotle said a rough sketch of the science itself. And then Aristotle talked about the kind of student who is suited to the study of political science and moral philosophy, and that's a student who is experienced to some degree in human affairs and can appreciate the topics investigated in political science, and a person who is interested in actually being and doing good, a self-controlled person who does not seek to merely indulge his passions, but seeks to live according to reason for his own benefit and for the benefit of his neighbors. And so a student who desires to be good and is gaining experience in the world is capable of benefiting from the study of moral philosophy and political science, which is its application. In chapter 4, Aristotle is going to go a little further in defining what the chief end or the ultimate good is, and then as our study continues, we're going to begin actually getting into the science itself once we wrap up this introduction to the study of ethics in general. So let's get started with chapter 4 of Aristotle's Ethics from book 1. Aristotle begins by saying, "Repeating therefore what we have said, since all knowledge and deliberate choice aspires after a certain good, let us show what that is which we say the political science desires, and what the supreme good is of all actions. By name, therefore, it is nearly acknowledged by most men, for both the vulgar and the learned call it by the name felicity or happiness. The supreme good is felicity or happiness. Both the vulgar and the learned call it by the same name. But they conceive, these two different groups, the learned and the vulgar, they conceive that to live well and to act well are the same thing as to be happy. Concerning felicity, however, what it is, they are dubious. The multitude do not form the same opinion of felicity as the wise. So though they both name felicity as the supreme good, when we go further and ask, okay, well, what is felicity? There, the vulgar and the learned disagree in defining felicity or happiness. For some of them conceive it to rank among the number of things which are clear and evident, such as pleasure or wealth or honor, but others assert it to be something else. Frequently, likewise, the same person forms a different opinion of it. For when diseased, he conceives it to be health, but when poor, he conceives the supreme good or felicity to be riches. And those who are conscious of their ignorance admire those who assert something grand and above their comprehension. Some, too, besides these many goods, are of the opinion that there is another good subsisting by itself, which is the cause to all these of their being good. To examine, therefore, all the opinions would perhaps be a vain undertaking, because there are so many different opinions of what good is or what the supreme good may be, it's impossible for us to consider all of them. It will be sufficient to consider those that are most eminent, or which appear to be in some respect reasonable. We must not, however, be ignorant that arguments from principles and to principles differ from each other. For Plato well doubts about and investigates this, whether the way is from principles or to principles. That is, how should we argue? Should we argue from principles, a priori, as the Latin phrase says, or to principles? As in a race from the president of the games to the goal, or the contrary. So how should we go about this investigation? For we must begin from things that are known, but these subsist or exist in a twofold respect. Some things are known to us, but others are simply or absolutely known. Perhaps, therefore, we should begin from things known to us. Hence, it is necessary that the auditor of discussions about things beautiful and just, and in short, about political concerns, if he is to be benefited, should be adorned with worthy manners. For the principle is this, that the thing is so, namely, that certain actions are worthy and others are unworthy. And if this is sufficiently apparent, it is not at all requisite to know why it is so. But such a one either possesses or will easily acquire ethical principles. Let him, however, who has neither of these, hear what Hesiod says. He, the first rank of excellence maintains, who from himself in everything is wise, and what even to the end is best foresees. He too is good who yields to wise advice. But he who neither from himself is wise, nor to assent to others can endure, is but a useless, despicable man. That's chapter 4 of book 1 of Aristotle's Ethics. So Aristotle makes it clear up front that all men tend to agree that the supreme good is something that they all can agree and call felicity or happiness. Happiness is what we all seek. But as soon as we go further in the discussion, as I said, it's difficult for us to explain or define what exactly felicity is. He says some just disagree on it altogether, like different groups of people. The vulgar and the learned, they have different opinions of what happiness is. He said others judge happiness to be relative to their present condition. When they're sick, they imagine, or if they are, habitually sick, like permanently ill, for them, happiness is living in a state free from sickness. Or if they're perpetually poor, they imagine that happiness would be to be rich. They judge happiness relative to their condition or sufferings or the evils that they experience. He then says that there are as many opinions concerning the nature of happiness as there are individuals, and therefore we can't investigate all of them, so we can only investigate the most eminent the most reasonable of those that are known. He talks about then the uncertainty of how the knowledge is to be pursued, whether it's to be pursued from principles or to principles, that is, whether it's to be pursued deductively or inductively. He then talks about the fact that the knowledge of what's good seems to be something that's self-evident, and to one who doesn't have the ability to realize what is self-evident to a good person would know instinctively what is good. Another person who lacks that discernment would need to listen to the advice of a good and wise person. We see this in the natural relationship between parents and children. Many issues parents have experience in and have an ability to discern good and evil before children can, and that's why it's wise for children to listen to and obey their parents. A good child will obey his parents. He'll do something that's good because mom or dad said so. Whereas a bad child will not only fail to discern what's good or prefer what's evil, but he'll also ignore and disobey the advice of those God has given him to direct him and help him avoid trouble. And so that leads us back to the question of the previous chapter, which is whether it's even possible for someone who has no interest in being good to study moral philosophy. One last comment, just to help you with your own reading of the text, is that where Aristotle talks about things known to us and things known to nature, or simply known, this is a general discussion that he takes up in other branches of philosophy. The way that we learn, he explains, is that we begin by observing things through the senses, and we generally know things as wholes, and then through analysis or investigation we can break them into parts and understand them in all of their parts, and then we can reassemble them. That's called synthesis. And then we can understand them in the end as they truly are, not as they simply appear. Our first knowledge of things is through appearance or sensual perception, and then through philosophical investigation and analysis we understand the true elements and principles of things and can then reconstruct them with wisdom by synthesis to understand them as they truly are, as they are known to nature itself. And so that's what he's talking about there, and that's the idea of deduction and induction. By studying individuals and making conclusions from our observation of individuals, which is sort of the natural way by which we learn, that's the act of induction. We're able to draw conclusions about classes of things from our experience or observation of individuals. That's one way to learn. And then there's the deductive method, which is to know what is self-evident about classes of things and then make logical conclusions and applications of those universal truths to individuals that belong to those classes. So the question of how to investigate these things is worth discussing. Obviously, Aristotle believes it's to be pursued deductively, since the art of reasoning, he argues, is the method of philosophical investigation. That's why in classical reasoning we study his works on the art of reasoning, which he titled the organon, or the method that's to be employed in the pursuit of philosophical knowledge. He believes that we pursue these things deductively, and that's another area where disagreement might lead to different conclusions on how. In modern circles, for example, modern science, all of the departments at a modern university will be inductive. They study by experimentation individuals. They seek to develop a large sampling of available individuals, and then they seek to draw conclusions that can be applied to the entire class. That's induction. That's the scientific method, or the Baconian method. The Aristotelian or scholastic method is to begin with universal principles that we can be certain of and then apply them down to the individuals. So let's stop there. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about, but in Chapter 4, we identify the supreme good, and a new problem arises, namely what exactly that supreme good is. We know that it's felicity. Everyone agrees on that, but what exactly is happiness is a controversy that's been discussed by philosophers all through history. In fact, if we look in the Gospels, we see Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, he teaches the Beatitudes, and the Beatitudes are his answer to the question, what is happiness? Think about it. He says, blessed or happy are those who are poor. Blessed are those who, and he goes through a list of Beatitudes or conditions in which men are to be understood to be blessed or happy. That's Christ's answer to this question, what is felicity? Obviously, the true answer that's provided to us by divine revelation. And just to comment on another topic while we're on it, that's a good example of the benefit that divine revelation offers to us. A topic that Aristotle explains is controversial, about which there's much disagreement, which is going to require a very long and arduous investigation, is a question that most human beings are not going to be able to answer. And so God, in his mercy, comes down to us through divine revelation and reveals the answers to such questions as he chooses to make known to us and help us understand, so that all men can know the truth in these important discussions and can know it with relative ease, that it's easy for all men to access this truth, and not just a few wise men through long years of study and experience, but all men can easily attain the knowledge through faith in divine revelation. So if we were to ask, what is the Christian answer to the question, what is felicity, that's raised in Chapter 4 of Aristotle's Ethics, the first place we would go is the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7, and we'd look to the Beatitudes, where Christ himself teaches us, as a matter of divine revelation, what happiness or true happiness is. So I don't want to get into that too much, but I want you to understand how this study of philosophy, and we can see just how wise and honest Aristotle is to acknowledge that there are some questions that are very difficult, of which we're uncertain, and then to see how God comes to our assistance and provides us through divine revelation with answers to these important questions in life. After all, as Aristotle says, how important, how helpful would it be for us to be able to identify the supreme good so that we can aim at it like an archer aiming at a mark, since having a mark to aim at will help us to be more successful in attaining it. So without wasting any more time, get to work studying Chapter 4 on your own, study it for mastery, and when you're comfortable with the content of Chapter 4, we'll keep on moving through the study of Aristotle's Ethics. God bless your studies.